y'all. Welcome back to AntiWar Radio. It's Chaos 92.7 in Austin, streaming live worldwide on the internet at chaosradioaustin.org and at antiwar.com/radio. Introducing our next guest, it's Lew Rockwell. He's the president of the Ludwig von Mises Institute of Austrian Economics and proprietor of the #1 most read and visited and talked about libertarian website in the entire world, LewRockwell.com. Welcome back to the show, Lew.
Scott, great to be with you as always.
Well, it's great to have you here, and I'm very curious. This is such a momentous period in American history. Lew Rockwell, president of the Ludwig von Mises Institute. Who are you voting for tomorrow?
Well, you know, it's a very tough choice between Nero and Caligula, and I have to really think about it. But of course, needless to say, I'm not voting.
I think I'd have to side with Nero in that one.
I mean, a vote, first of all, it's a pain in the neck. I mean, you have to go down in a government office, a government school, or some other kind of horrible rundown place and wait in a long line, fill out forms, be interrogated by bureaucrats, and then it makes no difference. I mean, unless the election in your congressional district or your state is decided by one vote, your vote doesn't count. And as Gordon Tullock, the economist from Arizona State, showed, you are far more likely to be killed on the way to the polls than you are to make a difference in the election.
Well, now, isn't that the #1 argument for tackling here when it comes to this voting thing? Everyone, right, I think, if you really break it down, ask them to really break it down, would accept what you just said as a fact, that unless it's really within one vote decided that their vote wasn't the one that made the difference, and yet the opposite of that is, yeah, but if nobody voted, then where would we be? We'd have a military dictator or something, right?
Don't we have a military dictator?
I'm not saying we don't.
No, voting has given us the biggest, richest, most powerful government in the history of the world, beyond many magnitudes. And as Hans Hoppe has demonstrated, as the franchise increases and more people vote, bigger the government gets. So it's not a coincidence that in a mass democracy we have this huge government. So it's not that the government or the bad guys would be somehow strengthened if we didn't vote. In fact, the bad guys would dramatically weaken because their power comes from the democratic myth. I mean, the idea that we are the government. In other, Hoppe points out, in other kinds of governments, everybody realizes that the governing class is a separate. Sometimes they're smart enough to realize a separate parasitical entity, but certainly they don't think of themselves as the government. Whether it's a king, whether it's a communist dictatorship, whatever particular form of regime it is, nobody thinks, when they talk about the government, they don't say we. However, in America, democracy, we say we. Should we invade Iraq? Should we have socialized medicine? And by we, of course, they mean the government. But we're not the government. The government in this country, just as much as Louis XIV, is a separate parasitical entity living off society, hurting, damaging society. But the way they stay in power in this country, and the reason they have far more power than any dictatorship ever, is because of this democratic myth. So it's a very, very important thing to the regime that we participate. It's why there's almost a religious aura. I mean, why you're almost a heretic and a traitor. Probably should burn at the stake if you don't want to vote. And you'll wear one of those little horrible stickers on your coat about I voted. I was joking with somebody last night. Maybe we need to print up some that say either I didn't vote or I won't vote or I never vote. Something that would give the if I were inclined to put a little paper tag on my coat. That's what I'd want mine to say.
I didn't vote is for sale right now at libertystickers.com, along with voting is for suckers and friends don't let friends vote and a few more along that line in the anarchism section there.
Scott, I should have known that you would be way ahead of the curve on this.
Yeah, I think in bumper sticker slogans, Lou. I plead guilty here. So what you're telling me is that if they just went ahead and they dealt honestly with us and they called Bush Prince Bush the Lesser, and he had just simply obviously inherited this power from the Skull and Bones bloodline or whatever it is, then he never would have had that mandate. He never would have had that 90% approval rating. We always would have treated him like the dog that he is, really pretending to be our master.
Well, as the late wonderful free-market conservative Eric von Knut-Ledeen, from whom Hans Hoppe and I and many others learned so much. I mean, he would point out that if, say, Louis XIV, I mentioned Louis XIV before, had decided that he was going to ban wine drinking in France, he would have been out the door and been lucky to keep his head on his shoulders. If he'd ordered all the people to tell him every April 15th, every dime they had earned, every dime they had, and then he decided how much he was going to take, he would have been out the door too. It's only democracies that can get away with these unbelievable tyrannies that actually tyrants are not able to get away with. And it's why the 20th century, which is the century of democracy, Hitler was elected. Certainly the communists always had elections, and it was all part of their propaganda. And we think, of course, in our country that's different from the communists. That in a communist country, why you just maybe have one guy voting, or maybe you have two exactly similar party members running in a phony vote. But of course, that's what we've got here too. I mean, you've got big government candidate A versus big government candidate B, or you've got Goldman Sachs candidate A versus Goldman Sachs candidate B, or warmonger candidate A, warmonger candidate B. It's not. We don't actually. First of all, the president, although we all get caught up in an election season in the sort of personalization of the state and the idea that somehow it's going to make a huge difference to our lives, whether it's Obama or McCain, and it can make a difference on the margin because of different interest groups and different people coming into power. But you know what? No matter which one of these guys is elected, the government still wins. The government is going to get bigger and more powerful, and at our expense. It's not actually a choice. We actually have no control through electoral politics over what's going to happen to us. So this is the myth. It's a religious aura. It's like the sacrament of the state. You're supposed to partake, and you're supposed to be a good little citizen and go along. I guess in the same sense, maybe you're supposed to agree that Louis XIV had the divine right to rule you. Well, we think the U.S. government has got the democratic right, even more powerful than the divine right, to rule us, and in fact, of course, in the view of too many Americans, the right to rule the world, too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that really is the most important aspect here, isn't it? The benefit of the doubt, the presumed legitimacy that comes with there having been an election between now and the time when this guy did all the evil things he wanted to do.
Well, I mean, does anybody really think that, it made a huge difference that it was Bush's versus Gore or Bush's versus Kerry? I'll agree that Bush is stupider probably than Gore or Kerry, but the government would have grown massively under them, too. People say it doesn't matter if you don't vote, nobody pays attention, but you know what? You were not participating. You were saying no to the regime. You were refusing to be part of the gang and be part of the crime. You're refusing to join the criminal gang. So there's something to be said for that. But they're very, very concerned about turnout. That's why they're all popping champagne corks, because they think voter turnout is going to be so high this year. And this is the source of the legitimacy. So if we could ever get more and more people not to vote, it would actually be very, very weakening to the regime and to its sense of legitimacy, and it'd be a great thing. So I think it's important not to vote, both from your own personal integrity standpoint, but also in the sense of public service. Very important public service. Don't vote.
Well, when Bush, I guess it's even debatable whether he actually got elected in 2004. They say, the theft of Ohio and New Mexico and things like that. But regardless, he did get the popular vote and he had 56 million. I don't know how many turned out for Kerry, but he had 56 million votes, which was a record number of votes for, I think, anybody in any election ever anywhere on earth. He then literally, Lou, went up on a balcony and gave a great speech that started with, "We've had our accountability moment. Now watch me soar."
Well, I mean, it's true that, that this is what gave him the legitimacy, that he had all these people vote for him. But again, I think it's all a trick. Elections are crooked. I don't want to bother anybody's civics class version of how the American government actually operates. But it's not only Mayor Daley in the old days in Chicago who was having the dead vote and making up, stuffing ballot boxes, throwing other ballot boxes, burying them in the river or burying them. This is the norm. Now they do it electronically. When Ron Paul was first elected in a special election, he was defeated in the next election. This is in 1976 by exactly this sort of thing. I mean, you had phony voters with addresses at public libraries and Gulf gas stations and even the Astrodome in Houston. I remember all, of course, this stuff very well. So there's the elections are not somehow pure while the rest of the government is crooked. The elections are crooked. I assume that they really were 56 million people who voted. Who the heck knows? I mean, and there's, of course, not just one party that's a bunch of thieves. Both parties are a bunch of thieves. So I guess in general, 56 million people voted, and I guess in general, Bush got more votes than Kerry. Or maybe he didn't. I mean, you can't actually know. These are the same crooks who will take your money to allegedly help the poor, and they're giving it to wealthy connected businessmen. These are the same people who will go bananas over alleged WMD in Iraq and then murder 1 million people in Iraq. And, they lie to us about everything.